What if I told you that the richest person who ever lived wasn't Jeff Bezos, wasn't Elon Musk, and wasn't even John D. Rockefeller? What if I told you this person's wealth was so incomprehensibly vast that it literally broke the global economy of his time? So enormous that when he died, gold became worthless across 3 continents, and his spending spree caused inflation that lasted for decades? This man controlled more wealth than the combined GDP of entire nations. He owned so much gold that he gave it away by the handful, crashing markets wherever he went. This man controlled more wealth than the combined GDP of entire nations. He owned so much gold that he gave it away by the handful, crashing markets wherever he went. To understand this story, we need to journey back to the 14th century, a time when Europe was struggling through the Dark Ages, China was flourishing under the Yuan dynasty, and one corner of Africa was about to become the epicenter of unimaginable wealth. The year is 1280. While Europeans are still figuring out basic banking, the Mali Empire in West Africa is sitting on something that would make modern oil reserves look like spare change, the richest gold mines in the known world. But gold wasn't their only treasure. They also controlled the salt trade, and in a world without refrigeration, salt was literally worth its weight in gold. Picture this: caravans stretching for miles across the Saharan desert loaded with gold dust, salt blocks, and ivory. Trade routes that connected sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and beyond. The Mali Empire wasn't just rich. It was the beating heart of medieval global commerce. But here's where the story gets interesting. Most of this wealth was flowing through one city, Timbuktu. Yes, that Timbuktu, the place we use today to describe somewhere impossibly far away. In the 1300s, Timbuktu wasn't remote. It was Times Square, Wall Street, and Silicon Valley all rolled into one. And controlling all of this wealth, all of these trade routes, all of these gold mines, was one man. A man whose pilgrimage to Mecca would become the most expensive road trip in human history. A journey so lavish that it would destabilize 3 different monetary systems and create an economic shockwave felt from Cairo to Constantinople. Our story begins with geography and geology, 2 forces that would converge to create the perfect storm of wealth accumulation. The Mali Empire, established in 1235, was blessed with what economists call a resource curse, except in this case, it was more like a resource blessing on steroids. The Bambuck and Beret goldfields contained some of the richest gold deposits ever discovered. They were controlled by one man, Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa ascended to power around 1312, inheriting an empire that was already wealthy beyond measure. But Musa wasn't content to simply manage his inheritance. He was a visionary who understood something that wouldn't be formally theorized by economists for another 400 years, the power of monopolistic control over essential commodities. Here's how his wealth accumulation system worked, and why it was so devastatingly effective. First, Musa controlled both ends of the most valuable trade equation of his time: gold from his mines, salt from his deposits. Second, he implemented what we now recognize as vertical integration on a continental scale. He didn't just mine gold. He controlled the trade routes, the transportation networks, the security forces, and the distribution centers. Third, and this is crucial, he understood the psychology of scarcity. Musa deliberately restricted gold output to maintain artificially high prices. He turned his gold mines into the medieval equivalent of OPEC, carefully controlling supply to maximize profit. But here's where it gets really interesting. While European kings were struggling to maintain basic taxation systems, Musa had created something unprecedented, a fully monetized economy based on gold standardization centuries before Europe figured out modern banking. Every transaction in his empire generated revenue for Musa. Every trade caravan paid taxes. Every merchant needed his permission. Every gram of gold that left his territory made him richer. He had essentially created a medieval version of Amazon, if Amazon controlled all the roads, all the warehouses, and all the products. By 1324, 12 years into his reign, Musa's wealth had reached a tipping point. He controlled an estimated 50% of the world's gold supply. His personal treasury contained more wealth than the treasuries of England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire combined. And then Musa made a decision that would change history forever. In 1324, Mansa Musa announced his intention to complete the Hajj, the religious pilgrimage to Mecca that every Muslim is supposed to undertake at least once in their lifetime. What should have been a spiritual journey became the most spectacular display of wealth in recorded history. But this wasn't going to be any ordinary pilgrimage. Musa assembled a caravan that defied comprehension. Imagine a parade that stretched for miles across the desert, but instead of floats, picture this, 60,000 people. That's larger than the population of most medieval cities. 500 servants, each carrying a solid gold staff weighing 6 pounds. 100 camels, each loaded with 300 pounds of pure gold dust. Thousands of horses, goats, and sheep for food. A mobile city complete with its own government, military, and economic system. The total value of gold in Musa's caravan. Historians estimate it at roughly $400 billion in today's money. But remember, that's just the gold he brought to give away. His total wealth back home was exponentially larger. As Musa's caravan made its way through North Africa, something unprecedented began to happen. In every city they stopped, Cairo, Alexandria, Damascus, Musa would distribute gold with the casual generosity of someone handing out business cards. In Cairo, Musa gave away so much gold that the market price of gold crashed by 25% overnight. Think about that for a moment. One man in one city, in one day, gave away enough gold to destroy a quarter of its value. The economic shockwave rippled through the entire Mediterranean trade network. But Musa wasn't done. In Alexandria, he built a mosque and paid the construction workers' wages in solid gold. In Damascus, he bought supplies for his caravan and paid prices so far above market rate that inflation spiked across the entire region. By the time Musa reached Mecca, word of his incredible wealth had spread across 3 continents. European merchants were frantically trying to figure out where all this gold was coming from. Middle Eastern traders were scrambling to get to Mali to establish trade relationships. Chinese merchants were hearing rumors of an African king whose wealth made their emperors look poor. But here's the kicker, and this is where we see Musa's true genius. While everyone was focused on his spending, they missed his real strategy. Musa wasn't just showing off his wealth. He was advertising. Every gold coin he gave away was a marketing expense. Every spectacular display was a business investment. Because while Musa was making it rain gold in Cairo, he was also quietly establishing trade agreements, diplomatic relationships, and commercial partnerships that would funnel even more wealth back to Mali for decades to come. The pilgrimage that was supposed to last a few months stretched on for years. And when Musa finally returned to Mali in 1326, he had accomplished something no ruler in history had managed. He had turned personal wealth into geopolitical power on a global scale. But here's where our story takes a dramatic turn, because Musa's incredible wealth, the very thing that made him the richest person in history, was about to become his greatest vulnerability. The first signs of trouble appeared in the 1330s, about a decade after Musa's return from Mecca. The massive influx of Malian gold into Mediterranean markets had created a chain reaction that economists today call monetary inflation on a continental scale. Here's what happened. Musa's gold giveaway had flooded the market with so much precious metal that gold's purchasing power collapsed. But this created a paradox. The more gold Musa had, the less each individual piece was worth. He was literally too rich for his own good. European merchants, initially excited about Mali's gold, began to realize they could get better deals elsewhere. The Chinese, always pragmatic about trade, started looking for alternative partners who weren't accidentally destroying their own currency value. But the real breaking point came from an unexpected source: climate change. Starting in the 1340s, the Sahel region began experiencing severe droughts. The same environmental conditions that had made Mali's agriculture and trade routes so profitable were shifting. Rivers that had powered gold mining operations for centuries began to dry up. Trade routes that had been safe and reliable became dangerous and unpredictable. And here's the cruel irony. Musa's incredible wealth had made Mali dependent on imported food and goods. When the environmental crisis hit, Mali couldn't sustain itself. The empire that had controlled global trade routes was suddenly at the mercy of those same global systems. Musa himself died around 1337, but the empire's problems were just beginning. His successors inherited incredible wealth, but also inherited the structural weaknesses that extreme wealth concentration had created. The gold mines, overworked to fund Musa's spectacular displays, began to play out. The trade routes, disrupted by climate change and political instability, became unreliable. The diplomatic relationships that Musa had bought with gold began to dissolve as Mali's power waned. Within 50 years of Musa's death, the Mali Empire was in terminal decline. The richest kingdom in human history was collapsing under the weight of its own wealth. The collapse of Mansa Musa's empire wasn't just a local African story. It was a global economic earthquake that reshaped medieval commerce across 3 continents. First, the immediate aftermath. As Mali's gold production declined and political stability deteriorated, the global gold supply suddenly constricted. The same markets that Musa had flooded with gold in the 1320s were now experiencing severe shortages by the 1380s. European kingdoms, which had grown dependent on Malian gold for their own monetary systems, found themselves facing currency crises. The Byzantine Empire, already struggling with political fragmentation, saw its gold-based economy destabilize just as it faced increasing pressure from the Ottoman Empire. But the most dramatic impact was felt in the Indian Ocean trade networks. Chinese merchants who had established extensive commercial relationships with Mali during Musa's reign suddenly found their African trade routes disrupted. This forced a massive reorganization of Asian commerce, ultimately contributing to the rise of European maritime exploration as alternative trade routes became essential. The attempted solutions were as spectacular as they were unsuccessful. Musa's successors tried to recreate his success through increasingly desperate measures. They stripped gold from existing structures, overtaxed trade routes, and even attempted to artificially inflate gold prices through market manipulation. Nothing worked. European powers, recognizing the vacuum left by Mali's decline, began the explorations that would ultimately lead to the Age of Discovery. Portuguese expeditions down the African coast weren't just about finding new territories. They were specifically searching for alternative access to West African gold mines that Mali no longer controlled effectively. Perhaps most tragically, the collapse of Mali's economic empire contributed to the conditions that would make the transatlantic slave trade economically viable. As traditional trade relationships broke down and economic desperation increased, human trafficking became an increasingly important component of West African commerce. The failed fixes reveal something crucial about the nature of extreme wealth concentration. When an economy becomes dependent on a single source of wealth, the failure of that source creates cascading problems that can't be solved by simply finding more money. Mali's leaders tried everything: currency devaluation, trade agreements with new partners, military expansion to secure new gold sources, even diplomatic marriages to forge financial alliances. But they were trying to fix a structural problem with tactical solutions. Now here's where this 700-year-old story becomes urgently relevant to our modern world, because the patterns that destroyed Mansa Musa's empire are playing out again today, just with different players and different resources. Consider this shocking parallel. Jeff Bezos, at his peak wealth, controlled about 0.15% of total U.S. GDP. Elon Musk, at his highest valuation, represented roughly 0.2% of global wealth. Mansa Musa? Conservative estimates put his peak wealth at nearly 4% of global GDP in the 14th century. That's not just rich, that's systemically important rich. But the similarities go deeper than just numbers. Look at the structural patterns: resource monopolization. Just as Musa controlled gold and salt, today's tech billionaires control data and digital infrastructure. Amazon doesn't just sell products, it controls the logistics networks, the cloud computing systems, and increasingly the financial payment systems that other businesses depend on. Geographic concentration. Musa's wealth was tied to specific goldfields in West Africa. Today's wealth is concentrated in specific tech hubs: Silicon Valley, Seattle, Austin. When these regions face challenges, the ripple effects are global. Currency manipulation. Musa's gold giveaways inadvertently crash regional economies. Today, when tech billionaires liquidate stock holdings or when countries dump dollar reserves, markets worldwide react immediately. But here's the most chilling parallel: environmental vulnerability. Musa's empire collapsed partly due to climate change that disrupted traditional trade routes and agricultural systems. Today's wealth concentration is built on systems that are equally vulnerable to climate disruption, from rare earth mining for electronics to global supply chains that depend on stable weather patterns. The failed solutions are eerily similar too. Just as Mali's successors tried to recreate Musa's success through increasingly desperate measures, modern governments are trying to manage wealth inequality through tactical fixes, tax tweaks, regulatory adjustments, monetary policy changes, while avoiding the structural reforms that might actually address the concentration problem. And the global impact. When Mali's gold supply disrupted, it triggered exploration that ultimately led to colonialism and the slave trade. Today, when tech wealth concentrates in certain countries, it's driving new forms of digital colonialism and data extraction that may have equally profound long-term consequences. From Mansa Musa's rise and fall, three crucial lessons emerge that every modern citizen should understand. First, extreme wealth concentration is inherently unstable. Musa's incredible riches weren't sustainable because they disrupted the very systems that created them. When one person or entity controls too large a percentage of total wealth, they inadvertently undermine the economic stability that wealth depends on. This isn't just ancient history. It's economic physics that applies whether we're talking about 14th century gold or 21st century tech stocks. Second, geographic and resource monopolies create systemic vulnerabilities. Musa's empire collapsed when environmental changes disrupted his gold mines and trade routes. Today's wealth concentrations face similar risks, from climate change threatening supply chains to geopolitical tensions disrupting global trade networks. Extreme wealth that depends on controlling specific resources or locations is always vulnerable to forces beyond any individual's control. Third, the global nature of extreme wealth means local problems become world problems. When Musa gave away gold in Cairo, it affected prices in Damascus. When his empire collapsed, it triggered exploration that reshaped three continents. Today's interconnected economy means that wealth concentration decisions made in Silicon Valley or Wall Street have immediate impacts in Lagos, Mumbai, and Sao Paulo. Individual wealth decisions are now, whether we like it or not, global policy decisions. Here's the uncomfortable truth that Mansa Musa's story reveals. We may already be past the point where extreme wealth concentration can be managed through conventional means. Musa's contemporaries couldn't see the systemic risk his wealth created until it was too late. The warning signs were there. Inflation, market distortions, diplomatic dependencies, but they were interpreted as temporary problems rather than symptoms of structural instability.
Are we making the same mistake today?
When we see market volatility triggered by individual billionaires' tweets, when entire industries depend on the decisions of a handful of tech executives, when national economies rise and fall based on the stock prices of individual companies, are these temporary issues, or are they warning signs of the same structural instability that ultimately destroyed the richest empire in human history? The story of Mansa Musa isn't just about one incredibly wealthy man from 700 years ago. It's about what happens to civilizations when wealth becomes so concentrated that individual decisions have systemic consequences. And it's about recognizing those patterns before they reach the breaking point. What do you think? Are we witnessing the early stages of a Mansa Musa-style concentration crisis, or are modern economic systems fundamentally different enough to handle extreme wealth concentration? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story changed how you think about wealth, power, and economic stability, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the historical patterns that explain our modern world. Because understanding the past isn't just about learning history, it's about recognizing the future before it happens.